Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. It's been a couple of months now and I've been really busy, so I haven't had a chance to get on and have some of my awesome guests. And this time I have another guest who I've met in LA during my time there, Mesrop Sarkisyan. Welcome to Off the Podium.
It's great to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
How's life?
It's good, man. Just had the album come out. I'm like chilling now, A lot of stress is gone,
Yeah. And when I heard your album, first off, the album was just released, and when I heard the album, it's such a high-level album, and I was not expecting this from you, because knowing your background, not hearing so much of your music, but knowing your background, I was expecting something classical or something a little bit more standard jazz, but this was truly a unique album, something I wasn't expecting. Tell us a bit about it. And you also told me a lot of your inspirations and some the people that influenced you. Just a little bit about the album and where it all started.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate the kind words, but yeah, man. So I grew up playing classical music, like from the age of I want to say like 10 till 18, 19. I studied classical music, and then I went to school for jazz, and I did that for a couple years, and then. The whole time while doing both of those things, I was never really, I guess, happy, because it was always like I felt like I was forced to do it. And I just remember with classical music especially, I just remember crying a lot after lessons, especially growing up with like Russian, Armenian, like that school of music, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They're definitely very strict and they don't hold back. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
It's nice though, because it helps you develop a thick skin, and it's like, you can't really say things to me that teachers haven't already said to me, you know? Just terrible things. But, just after graduating college, I kind of had this thing where I was like, man, what do I really want to do with music? Like, why did I want to become a musician in the first place? And I realized it was because I was inspired by people who created music and not people who played music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that kind of, like, pushed me to, like, make my own thing. And it also helped me to not put myself in a box of like, okay, I'm going to be a classical musician or I'm going to be a jazz musician. I just wanted to be a musician, And that revelation really helped me like break those boundaries within myself of like, this is classical, this is jazz, this is rock, or this is electronica,
Yeah.
And I kind of just wanted to make something that embodied all of my influences and just like write without saying no to things,
And that's tough to do sometimes, because you come from these backgrounds, and some of the artists that influenced you are in some ways within certain genres, but to come out and do something that's doesn't fit well or into any of those genres that you grew up listening to, it's tough. It must be tough.
Yeah, I mean, it was and it wasn't. I mean, once I made the distinction within myself of like, well. Like Beethoven, when Beethoven was writing, he wasn't thinking like, I'm writing romantic era music right now. He was just writing music.
Yeah.
So I just kind of started to approach it like that, of like, it's just music. It's like, why should I say that I'm going to write jazz or I'm going to write this, I'm just going to write, and whatever happens, happens.
That's great. That's a good way to think about it. Now to the album, and we'll go back and forth between, college days and post-college, but a little bit about the album. And it's a really interesting story, and I don't know how much you want to get into the background of the album and what kind of led you to the album, but it's a very interesting story, and I think it's something to share with people if you are interested. You could go ahead and start right from the top where we talked about earlier, and you mentioned.
Yeah. So back in like I want to say 2014, I started developing like really, really bad anxiety. Like to the point where I would wake up in the morning and I would just feel like this ball in my chest, and I just have panic attacks from like literally the moment I would wake up till the moment I would go to sleep. And this went on for I want to say about 2 years.
Wow.
So like literally every day of that, and it was just really, really torturous. And like I went to literally every doctor that I could find, like cardiologists, like and gastrology, like everything, and like did x-rays and blood tests and scans, and I was just like, what's wrong with me, because I literally thought I had like cancer or I was dying, because I was like, because I always, I've always experienced anxiety, but I always thought anxiety was like a mental thing, I never knew it could be so physical, So that scared me a lot. And so yeah, I went to like every doctor I could find, and they were like, "Yeah, you're very, very healthy. I don't know why you're here." And that, that kind of that drove me even crazier, because I was like, I can't be healthy. Don't tell me I'm healthy. Like, I'm feeling all these things, So, and then I had a friend. One of my best friends is like a brilliant psychologist, and he kind of sat me down, and he was like, "Look, man, this is all very textbook. This is just anxiety." And I didn't really believe him at the time, because, again, what I thought anxiety to be was like a mental thing, not a physical thing. Mm-hmm. And then at CSUN, where I went to college, there was this class called Alexander Technique, and a friend of mine just like mentioned it to me, like in passing, and I decided, I was like, you know what, like, let's just take this class. So I took the class, and within like a couple minutes of being there, it just like felt like this is what I needed, And so I talked to the teacher afterwards, and I started studying with her privately, and it literally like saved my life.
Wow.
Because getting to the point where I was like, man, if this is going to be my life, because it had been for like 2 years at that point, if this is going to be my life, like, is it even worth living like this?
Yeah. And so, before you continue, for those who don't know about Alexander Technique, a little bit about that before you continue going forward with the story.
Yeah. So it's always really hard explaining Alexander Technique to people, because I people usually look at me like I'm crazy when I talk about Alexander Technique. But I think the best way to explain it is just, it teaches you how to utilize your body better. Mm-hmm. Better. And it's technically meant for like actors and musicians, because it helps like anxiety and all that stuff. But it's really just, it just teaches you how to use your body better, and how to like allocate energy and like thought better to reduce anxiety and reduce stress on your body. And like, your body and mind are so connected. So it's like, you fix your body and you end up fixing your mind, and vice versa. And it's just like a cycle, You can't really work on one without working on the other.
Yeah.
And that's what Alexander Technique is. And yeah, it really literally saved my life.
Yeah. And let's continue with where you were, which is you were at a point where you said, is it really worth living?
Yeah. And if I hadn't found that, I don't, I hate to like, I don't want to make it like I don't want to talk about it like it's nothing, but like, I don't take suicide lightly, and I don't think I would have ever committed suicide, but it was definitely getting to the point where I was like, I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I literally wake up and I can't breathe, I can't enjoy anything, like, I'm not even living right now. I'm just like existing, like, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
And then, Alexander Technique definitely like helped me with that. But, that was a very strong uphill battle for a while, It wasn't just like, oh, it's gone now.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm definitely in a much, much better place now. Like, like, I can't even compare the two.
To whom it may concern.
Yeah. So, a couple things about that track. So,
and that's the first track on your album.
Yeah, that's the first track on my album. And I kind of thought it was a good title because, it's kind of like an introductory title, and also it was also kind of the way at my lowest points when I was thinking about it, I was like, if I ever wrote a suicide note, I think I would start it with "To Whom It May Concern." So I just thought, I'd start the album like that, and that track actually was just a vamp, that opening vamp that happens. That's all it was, and I was just like, I'll probably put this somewhere in the album as like an interlude, and I'll solo over it or something. And then my friend Coda came over, and because I was asking him to sing on some of the other tracks, and I just like played that for him, just as like, oh, hey, check this out. Yeah. And he just started like riffing on it, and I was like, okay, I guess we have to make this a song now.
Yeah.
But it was just like a happy accident, sort of, like it was really not meant to be a track of its own. And then the track used to be a lot longer, actually, until I sat down. So I have this friend, Armin Mesrop, and he's an amazing, amazing producer and drummer. I went to him because I was like, oh, I want you to mix my album. And he was like, bro, like, I produce, but I don't mix. And I was like, okay, cool, let's do this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of so we started mixing, quote unquote mixing, which wasn't really mixing. What ended up happening was he just co-produced that first track with me. and we spent a good like month on that of just like arranging it and shortening sections and adding sections and trying to make it more, I guess, like a pop song, so to say. Not necessarily, but just because it was much longer, the intro was much longer, and just didn't have like the same that he made it have. You know, he really shaped that track a lot.
Based on everything you said about just having a hard time mentally, physically, and the suicide, thinking about it, you're also a huge fan of comedy, which is at times for people thinking about these things, you think about depression but not comedy, but some of the greatest comedians, and I've read some of their stories, they also had serious depression issues.
Yeah, man. I feel like you can't really create without like having like this deep connection with suffering. You know, I mean, I think suffering is a built-in experience to just existence.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're able to connect with comedy and music and art. It's because, you know, people manifest their suffering into like this tangible object that then helps us like alleviate some of our own suffering, you know? And like comedy definitely was that for me, you know? Because it's like, you know, at funerals, sometimes people cry. Yeah. And then sometimes people laugh, you know? Yeah. Because it's like, it's that manic state of like you don't know which one to do, and it's almost like a defense mechanism. You know. And I definitely realized that, you know, comedy for me a lot of the time is like not a defense mechanism necessarily, but it's definitely a coping mechanism. You know. But I'm like a huge fan of comedy, and it's, you know, I would say I'm probably as influenced by comedy as I am by music.
And that's so great to hear, because I speak to musicians and they talk about so much about their influences connected to music and these great composers, these great artists and musicians, but they rarely bring into any of the other art forms or non-art forms into what inspired them. So it's great to hear that comedy inspires you. What else inspires you?
Man, I mean, Tesla, I want to say, and not Elon Musk, but like Nikola Tesla is definitely probably... arguably probably my biggest influence of all time, you know, because, you know, there's a man who literally, he, you know, charted uncharted territory, you know, and I think when we look at people who we admire, I think it's that we admire about them. It's not so much like the art itself, although that's a part of it, but I think like, you know, when you look at Beethoven, the reason we admire him is because he, you know, he created a new genre of music, you know, or like look at Bach and it's like, you know, you make something out of nothing, and I think that's what's truly admirable about any great person, and that's why I don't really draw lines between like, oh, this guy's a musician and this guy's a this and that. You know, it's like they're all great people who were able to, you know, go to somewhere where no one's been before. That's the truly inspirational part.
And it's so tough to do that at any time in the history of the world, because you have all these people that might question what you're doing, or might not say, you know, there's so many stories with Beethoven and other composers where people questioned them and said this is impossible or this is not right, but it takes so much courage and passion for the future to really drive them and motivate them to do the things that they do, not only for themselves but also for the future generations in education. And so you teach. Now that we talk about education, you do a little bit of teaching.
I do teach, and it's weird. Again, another one of my huge influences is the teachers I've had in my life, you know? Because as far as I can remember, anyone who's really pushed me to do something has been like a very good teacher, you know? And I've had a lot of really bad teachers, you know? Teachers who have just kind of like... I know they had the best intentions in their heart, because they thought, you know... Like, for instance, like, you know, the whole Beethoven's dad would, like, you know, beat him and stuff like that, you know? And it's that, I think they go with that mentality of like, oh, if you know, beat someone long enough, then they develop character and blah, blah, blah. And like, yeah, that's partially true, but I think there's better ways of doing that. Yeah. I've definitely been influenced by teachers, and it's become like an actual real passion of mine. Like, I didn't think I would like it as much as I ended, like now like it. The way I see it is like, I have something to give back. However big or small it might be, that's not important. Yeah. But I have something to give back, so I feel like it's my duty as a human that I've been given so much knowledge by others to just, you know, transfer it to someone else. Yeah.
And that's an important thing to think about, because, you know, sometimes I hear musicians say, "Oh, I'm really going to be a performer," and down the road when I have tried everything in my performance career. I'll go back to teach because it's so. But performing and teaching should be together. You should always be teaching, and you also learn a lot from teaching.
Yeah, definitely. I was about to say that. It's like I've learned so much from teaching students because it's like if you can teach something, that means you really, really know it.
Exactly.
And the satisfaction of like banging your head against the wall of like trying to teach someone circle of fifths for like 2 months,
Yeah.
And at that moment when it clicks, it's like, yes, finally.
Yeah. And you only get better, just like with anything, just like with performing or composing or whatever. You get better at it, of understanding those, explaining or understanding what the other person feels and is reacting to the things that you say. So it's a constant learning process, not just for the student but also for you. So it's amazing. When I said you were going to be on, I got a few questions. I said ask questions, and a couple of people sent me questions. And one of the questions was, what motivates you to write music?
I guess like the simple answer would be life. I know it's like a very vague sort of thing, but really, there's this Keith Jarrett interview. Keith Jarrett is probably one of my biggest influences of all time, and there's this. He has this documentary called The Art of Improvisation, and there's this point in there where they talk to him. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because I don't remember exactly, but they ask him like, do you do other things? Like, do you go to the movies? Do you read books? Do you do this and that? He's like, yeah, of course. And he says this really brilliant. He's like, people think that music comes from music. He's like, it's not true.
Yeah.
He's like, that's like saying babies come from babies.
That's awesome.
And that really, and I remember hearing that, and that really clicked with me. It's like, yeah, I mean, music should be a reflection of your own existence,
Yeah.
So I guess living, other than the fact of like other musicians and other great people, obviously.
Yeah.
But just trying to express, I guess. I'm sorry if that's very vague.
No, that was great. And one thing about Keith Jarrett, and you were talking about not having genres, not trying to be a part of a certain genre, and that I've always thought of Keith Jarrett that way, because although he's a couple of generations probably older than us, he's equally fantastic as a classical pianist. I've heard him play some classical pieces, and he's great. And he's also a jazz musician. He's also a classical composer. And I'm saying classical composer, but there's maybe no genre for him as well. But the great thing is, a couple of months ago, a violist friend of mine came up to me and said, "Oh, it'll be great to collaborate with your orchestra." And I was like, "Okay, sure, whatever you want." And and the only thing I said was that find something interesting that maybe is not often done. She comes back to me and she says, "Hey, so there's this really cool Keith Jarrett viola piece. Do you want to do that? It's for viola and orchestra." So actually, we're going to be performing the West Coast premiere of a viola concerto by Keith Jarrett.
Wow, that's crazy.
Someone who's so inspirational and really does not maybe put boundaries or walls in what he does. So it's someone who's very, very inspirational to me as well, and I didn't know about that aspect of his life,
Yeah.
So for those who don't know about the album, and it just came out, how would you describe it? I mean, give us some big names, maybe well-known artists that might have inspired that album, so people kind of have an idea of what it might sound like. If you were to describe it in words, it's tough.
Yeah. Well, probably my biggest influence of all time is probably Brad Mehldau. He's definitely like if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick him. Okay. It's really hard to pick just one, but I think if I had to pick one, it'd be him, So definitely him. So I've thought about this before of like my influences, and I know we just had this whole talk about not categorizing and all that stuff, but I kind of categorize my influences as like, okay, I have my pianist influences, then I have my composer influences, then I have my producer influences. So I guess the top 5 pianists for me would be Brad Mehldau would be at the top, and the next 4 in no particular order would probably be Keith Jarrett, Tigran Arakelyan, Bill Evans, and Glenn Gould. I'd say those are the top 5 biggest influences for me when it comes to like piano players.
Each one of them completely different from the other. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I admire the most about each one of them is that they're so different. And then I have like my bands, like probably Mars Volta is probably my favorite band of all time.
Yeah.
But it's it's always weird saying that. Not weird, but I feel like I always have to clarify because there's like they have so many different times. I don't know if you're a huge Volta fan. I don't know if you've checked them out before, but
no, not I know of the band. I've heard some music, but
yeah. So
don't know their music too well.
They have like their original drummer, who's John Theodore, who's probably my favorite drummer of all time, and they made 3 albums with him: Deloused and Comatarium, Francis the Mute, and Amputecture. Deloused and Francis are probably my 2 favorite albums of all time, just in general. And then John Theodore left, and they had other drummers come in, and like they changed a lot. And I still like the other stuff, but their first 2 albums, like what defines Mars Volta. And then Knee Body is probably second, if not just as big as Mars Volta is, and Adam Benjamin is like probably one of my biggest influences as a composer.
Okay.
And that band, just the way they sound, and that's another thing I admire about them is they're considered jazz technically, but it's like they don't sound like jazz. They sound like Knee Body.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the same way with Brad Meldau or any of the other people I've met. It's like I can't really put a genre on Brad.
Yeah.
I can call him a jazz musician and a classical musician and all that, but it's like at the end of the day, it's just he sounds like Brad.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all he sounds like.
Yeah. That album with the drummer and Brad Meldau, what's his name?
Emiliano.
Yeah, and that was an album that really I was shocked to hear that was Brad Meldau on that album.
Yeah, that's actually a turning point in my life when I heard that album.
Yeah,
that really helped me make the transition from because it's funny that I've just made an electronic album using like synths and stuff because. I remember back in community college days. This is when I was like probably 20 years old. I remember writing a essay in English class about acoustic music versus electronic music, and how acoustic music is far superior to electronic music. And it's like looking back on it, it's funny to think that I was such a huge guy of like, no, it's all about acoustic music, and you can't achieve the same emotions that you can with acoustic that you can with electronic, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I think that was a huge turning. That Million album was a huge turning point for me. Of like, okay, like I guess maybe there's something to these electronic instruments, and I kind of started getting more into them.
Yeah.
And then I have my electronic influences. Like Baths is a huge one for me. And then John Hopkins, who's he's more like I don't know. I guess he's like house EDM type guy. Not really. I mean, that sounds bad. But he's really like a visionary when it comes to that genre, and he definitely was a huge influence on me of like just because the way I look at electronic music is like they're playing with sound more so than harmony or melody. It's like when I listen to Brad, it's like all these harmonies and melodies and all these counterpuntal like ideas and stuff. But when I listen to electronic music, it's just like sound. Like the way they treat sound. It's like, for instance, someone like Baths. Like we'll take like a scissor snapping or like some like newspaper or whatever. Like he'll just take sounds that he'll record himself, and then he'll process them and like use them in interesting ways as like a snare drum or whatever, And that really inspired me, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a really cool idea. So there's a lot of field recording type stuff on the album, where it's like there's a lot of water noises. There's there's sounds of like. It's like me walking on like sand, and then I took that and I took like a little piece of it and like compressed it and put a filter on it and put like a chorus and all the distorted it, and then made it into like a snare sound.
Yeah,
and I really like doing things like that, and I think that was the biggest thing with discovering Ableton for me was just like it opened up like this world of possibilities of like I don't have to just write harmony and melody anymore. I can now work on like producing and making sounds more so than just like a song.
Yeah.
I really don't want to come off pretend. I'm really not trying to be pretentious. It's just, I'm just trying to like explain like the way I was trying to approach it mentally.
Yeah, And the crazy thing is, sometimes the younger generation doesn't understand where the electronic music came from. But electronic music in classical music and in jazz has had a long history. Edgar Varese, classical composers started that off. Early part of the 20th century as well. So it's been part of it, and it's so great that it's really being accepted and respected now. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So another question that I was just looking at was asked to you, and I know the answer, but it'll be great for you to kind of talk about. Do you write the lyrics to your music?
I have like a say in it, but I definitely, both with Coda and Christiane, who sang on the album, I definitely gave them pretty much like almost 100% just like artistic integrity, like do whatever you want. I mean, I definitely guided them. There was points where I was like, I kind of want the melody to sound like this, and this is the general arc, and maybe don't use that lyric, let's try something else. Yeah. But it was mostly them doing it. I'm definitely not a lyricist by any means.
Another question that I got was, what word of advice would you give to people who are looking into starting composing, young composers?
I would say just do it. No matter what you do, you're gonna do it like yourself.
Yeah.
Like there's really no other way to do it other than your own way.
Yeah.
So you can't be anyone else but yourself.
Yeah.
So like just start doing it, and you'll learn along the way. And like your first piece is probably not gonna be a masterpiece, although who knows? It's possible. Like there's really no rules to it, but just write and don't judge your own writing, I guess, which is something I used to do a lot.
When I read about you, you said that you started, you got into jazz specifically at around 19. Did you not have any any interest in jazz before that? Because it's so weird, because a lot of people in your generation that they want to be jazz musicians, or at least are interested in jazz earlier on than 19.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt that way, because I remember going to school and feeling like, man, I'm just starting this jazz thing, and like these guys, like they're so much younger than me, and they can like play their asses off. And, like it was really very intimidating. But I mean, my dad was a huge jazz fan, and I think that's where I got it from.
Yeah.
Because my dad and uncle are both drummers.
Okay.
And my uncle actually played in an Orbelian orchestra back in Armenia.
Oh wow.
Yeah, as a drummer.
Yeah.
But so I definitely, they kind of influenced me with jazz. Although it's funny, like when I look back on my musical life, most music has been like shoved down my throat. Like classical music was shoved down my throat, which is why I hated it for such a long time. Jazz was shoved down my throat, which is why I hated it for such a long time. And it wasn't until I had the option to make my own choice that I was like, I actually like classical, and I actually really like jazz,
Yeah.
But I definitely didn't. I was always intimidated by jazz, because I always thought like, I can't play jazz. Like you have to be like a super musician to play jazz. Because I'd look at people like Keith Jarrett and Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea and be like, well, I'm nowhere near the level of these guys. Why would I even try it, Which is a horrible way to think.
Exactly.
Like a horrible way,
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I felt for a long time, and that's why it took me so long to like try playing jazz.
Yeah. So one thing, listening to your album, I listened to it a couple of times. Are there going to be any live performances? And if there are going to be live performances, how do you plan to put that whole thing together in a live performance?
Well, here's the thing: is I was really stoked on the idea of doing a live performance at first. And then the more I thought about it, like logistically and all that stuff, I was like, you know what, maybe it's better to not do anything with this for right now and just release it and kind of leave it. Because also the whole album is like 15 minutes, 17 minutes.
Yeah.
And, during a live performance, you could probably switch that out to like 25 minutes, maybe 30, but like you're pushing it at that point.
Yeah.
It's 4 songs. So the option was like write more music, or just wait. And I think I've kind of settled on just waiting at the moment.
Okay.
And maybe doing a live performance thing later when I have like a full LP instead of just like a short EP thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really wanted to do it because I thought it would be a lot of fun. And another thing that I was thinking was like, I would actually not want the live performance to sound like the album.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to sound like the album, like the songs are gonna be the same, but like I wasn't thinking like I have to make it exactly the same, and how am I gonna play all these parts all by myself?
Yeah.
It was kind of like, because I think a live show should be different. That's why it's a live show. It's like if you go to a live show, and I've been to many of these where it's like you go and it's just literally the same thing as the album. It's like I could have just listened to this at home. It's like, why am I coming to the live show? So I definitely am a strong believer in like the live show should be different. Obviously not radically different, but there should be improvisation and communication and things like that happening in the live show. So I wasn't so stressed about like I have to make it sound exactly like the album, but I decided on not doing it in the end.
Yeah. So CSUN, Cal State University Northridge, is known for a very good jazz program, and they always win awards at downbeat competition, which you won a prize at the downbeat competition with your band. Yeah. What do you take away from a college experience like that? Because I meet some people and they say they've learned more outside of college than in college. So what have you taken away from the college experience?
Well, I hate to be another one of those people, but definitely the same thing goes for me. I definitely learned way more in like the year out of college than I would say that I learned in like all 4 or 5 years that I was in college.
Oh wow!
Because like there was definitely like I had a couple professors who like like Gary Pratt. I don't know.
Yes.
Did you go to CSUN?
Yeah, I went there for my master's. Conducting.
Oh, okay, nice. So did you know Gary Pratt?
Yes, he's also
Gary
a conductor.
Pratt. Yes, he is.
Yeah.
He is. He's we call him among the students. We call him the guru.
Yeah.
Because, man, I can't think of a time where I've sat down and talked with him and not had my mind just blown. He just he's literally a guru because he knows what to say to you.
Yeah.
He knows where you are, both in your growth and everything, and he knows exactly what to say to you to like push you to that next point.
Yeah.
So any class or any experience that I shared with Gary Pratt was like I can't put a price on that.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Dr. Howard. Did you have Dr.
No.
Howard when you were there?
Never.
Dr. Howard taught like harmony and counterpoint and things like that. And he was one of those guys where I remember the first semester I took his class, I bought the book, and I didn't really use it because I would just listen to him and that was enough.
Yeah.
He's one of those people who just explains things so clearly that it's like impossible not to understand.
Yeah.
So the second semester for his second part, I didn't buy the book because I was like, I'm not going to need the book. And I didn't. I truly didn't. Because I would just sit there and listen to him and absorb all of it. And it was just, he was just incredible. And he kind of was the guy who re-sparked my love for classical music.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to sound dramatic. I obviously learned a lot in college, but it's a process, It's like you have to go through that part of college and like having all this information and not knowing what to do with it and being lost, and then you get out and you get to finally like process it all. And it's like I don't think like it's tough saying that I didn't learn anything from college because it's like I just see it as one whole thing. Like being in college and being out of college, like that whole thing, I just see it as one thing. Because it's like I wouldn't have had the experience of being out of college if I was never in college.
Yeah.
So it's kind of unfair to say that I didn't learn anything in college because I definitely did. But I don't know. I definitely don't think I'm a good student.
Well, I always ask this question because I find that I did bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees, went to all these colleges, and I have a lot of problems with the college system, especially in the music education. But if you were given an opportunity, you're dean of this college program, based on your post-college experiences, what are some things that come to mind that you would like to implement in a college experience?
That's a good question, man. I think I would definitely include more classes about like how to be a person, like how to be a musician as a person, not so much like how to play and all that stuff, but like teaching people how to interact with each other. And like there's a really, really big problem among jazz and classical musicians of like being really pretentious and mean to each other.
Yeah.
And I really have like zero tolerance for that because I think it's the ugliest thing ever.
Exactly.
And that would definitely be like a thing I try to help with, and also playing more and like more listening classes, where you just sit and listen to music and not so much analytical stuff, because the analytical stuff is cool, but for me personally, I just never felt like I really learned anything from analyzing music. Like it was cool and it was fun, but I don't Maybe I did. I don't know. Maybe in some way it processed itself and manifested in another way. But personally, I never felt like I was really learning about music. I was analyzing it.
Yeah.
You know, the times where I felt like I was truly learning was when I was like thrown into like a situation where I didn't know what to do and I had to improvise and get my ass kicked. You know, and I think you need more of that.
Yeah. And the thing about classical and jazz, specifically musicians just being mean to each other and all this, it's truly a problem, because it also puts people in a terrible situation mentally and physically. Being depressed about hearing some things about yourself from other people. All these things, and the saddest part about all of this is that a lot of what happens, a lot of what people talk about or be mean to each other, has sometimes little to do with their musical abilities and more to do with just personality things. People.
Yeah, I was about to say the same. It's it's not so much about you; it's more them. You're absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, I mean it's sad, and I would definitely agree with you on that. And actually, you're the first person to answer that question in that manner. So I'm happy you said it. What's next? What's next for you?
I haven't been playing piano much recently. I've been working on the album and producing and learning about Ableton and stuff, because this really was, I started messing around in Ableton about a year ago, and I made like a stupid track, and I was like, oh, you know what, like I kind of enjoy doing this, and so I decided, and then I was hanging out with a friend, and we were just talking, and he was kind of like, he brought up the idea of like, hey, are you thinking about making an EP or anything, or releasing an album? And I was like, yeah, maybe sometime down the line. And he was like, well, he's like, listen, man, you can either be you with an EP in 6 months, or you can be you without an EP in 6 months. And I was like, damn, okay. So he kind of lit the fire under my ass to like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna make something. I started doing that, and now I'm kind of starved for the piano again. So I'm going back and like classical repertoire. So I picked up like Chopin's Second Scherzo and Beethoven's Appassionata, and then I'm thinking about picking up something from Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. I haven't decided which one yet. And then I really want to pick up a Ravel piece too. Yeah, I just really want to go back and just like study and just play some classical music, because I really miss it.
Yeah. A couple more questions. So I had bassist Christian McBride on, and I asked him, I said, why do jazz musicians and the jazz music scene in general want to be so much like the classical music world? Why did it get away from the people, and it's more of an academic scene more so than really the music of the people? Because I feel like classical music made that mistake, hundreds of years ago, and it's kept getting away from the people, and now, the audiences keep declining and all this stuff. So what happened with jazz, if we don't get into the history so much, and we just take your opinion on this? What happened with jazz?
Well, first of all, I want to say it's kind of nice hearing a classical musician say that, because I'm always afraid to talk to classical musicians about that, because I agree. I feel like both, especially classical music, went terribly wrong somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think what happens, and I think it's the kind of the same thing that happened with jazz, is like they become so concerned with preserving the tradition and the history that they stop innovating, you know? Because it's like, again, going back to the earlier point of like, Beethoven wasn't like, I'm going to write classical music. Yeah. He was just like, I'm going to write music that I'm hearing, you know? And I think that's what's went wrong with both. And like, especially in the classical music scene, like the stories I hear about, some of the things happening with like classical composition programs in certain schools of like, like people will make a composition where it's like just two people yelling at each other. You know what I mean? And like, it's like, oh, this is brilliant and this can't be replicated. And it's like, I don't know, man. It's like, it just seems like people are trying to be innovative for the sake of being innovative, as opposed to writing something that they believe in, and just writing what they hear. I remember Nibali did a clinic once at CSUN, and they got asked the question about, like, how do you write music? And I think it was Kaveh, the bass player, who replied, and he said, well, first of all, we write music that we like. And at the time, I remember thinking, like, well, duh, obviously, like, what a dumb thing to say. But then a couple years later, actually pretty recently, I started reflecting back on that. I was like, that's actually not that common sense of a thing to say. Like, people actually don't really do that, I feel like, Like, it's so hard to really, like, write what you actually want to write, and not try to be like, oh, is this cool enough? Is this hip enough? Like, would so and so approve of this? You know what I mean?
And has this been done before? If it hasn't, then I'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that should be a goal, you know, but it shouldn't be the drive behind why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Like, that should be like a side effect of like you just writing what you hear, and if it happens to be something new, then it's something new.
Yeah.
But you know, because I think, and it's weird, I almost prefer the opinion of like non-musicians over the opinion of musicians about music sometimes, because myself included, like, we can get so analytical and like, oh, like, I've heard this before, or like, oh, that thing he's doing, oh, he took that from this, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like you kind of lose the phenomenon of music when you do that, you know? And I feel like non-musicians are lucky because they don't have that, and they just get to take it for face value, which there's a lot to that, man. You know, I think art in general, like, it shouldn't be put on a microscope so much. Like, yeah, it's cool to do that, but you got to be able to turn that off.
Yeah, and it's not just about us. It's not just about musicians, you know, because we as you said, we think so much about what we want to do and find something new to contribute, and what our colleagues who are equally intense and crazy about this type of music, what they feel, and less about what the people want to hear and what the people are thinking about what we're doing. So it's nice that you said that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I've struggled with a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. You know, I always felt like I was the weakest musician, and I still sort of do. Like, in any room I'm in, I'm always just like, man, everyone here is so much better than me. And I've gotten better at that. I don't do that so much anymore. Yeah. But it creeps in every now and again, and it's not a healthy way to think. You know?
Yeah. So I was, gonna ask a couple more questions, and then we'll be done. It's kind of surprising, but we've been at it for about 45 minutes now, dealing with everything that you had to deal with mentally, physically. And I know it's tough. You mentioned some of the advice maybe you would give to other people, but what would you say to other people having anxiety and dealing with mental and physical problems and trying to figure it out? What advice would you give?
I would say don't run from it, because that was a pivotal point for me. It was like, okay, I'm feeling this, and instead of trying to cover it up and justify it and try to make it go away, I'm just going to sit here and just let myself feel this, and I'm just going to watch. And once you start doing that, you kind of it starts going away, you know? Once you stop treating it like this big thing, because it's only as big as you make it, you know? Yeah. So the second you start taking its life force away, which is your thought, it kind of starts dying, you know? And if you just sit there and, like, look at it, you'll actually learn a lot about yourself and about your demons and about your shadow and the things you're hiding from your own self, you know? Yeah. And in a weird way, it's like I'm so thankful and grateful for, like, all the things that I went through, because it's like you learn so much about yourself, and like, again, like, your demons, and it's like, oh wow, like, I didn't know all this stuff about myself, you know. So I'd say treat it as a blessing rather than a curse. That's what I would say.
And how much was music a part of your life during this period of time?
It was a big part. It's actually like it helped a lot, you know, just like listening to music. It was actually weird. I remember when I was feeling super anxious and I would sit down at the piano to start playing. That was actually one of the few times where I wasn't feeling anxious. Because I was able to channel that into something else, you know? And
the last question I always ask, what's anything that we've missed that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to? I'm sure there are many things, but it's something that comes to mind that you didn't talk about, you want to say.
Oh, really? I don't think I can't really think of any. I mean, I don't remember exactly what we've talked about. You know, we've just been kind of going and going. Yeah. So I don't think we've missed anything.
Now, of course, we'll do this again at some point. Yeah, we'll talk more. And before we go, some ways people could be in touch with you: social media, website, all these different things, and also where can they get your album now that it's out?
Well, you should be able to find it on Spotify, iTunes. Tidal, I think. I think I put it on a bunch of things. Okay. Spotify, iTunes, obviously, Bandcamp, SoundCloud. Okay. And then, Facebook, Instagram. I have a Twitter, technically. It's I remember I made one a long time ago just to, like, follow artists and comedians. Yeah. So I don't really use it I have like, I think like 4 followers on there. I don't even know why I have 4 followers, but I guess you can follow me on Twitter, and maybe if I have like enough followers on there, maybe I'll start using it. But at the moment, I'm not really using it.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure I put some of those links underneath our chat so people could reach out to you and get in touch.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it. It was a huge pleasure talking to you, man.
Man, it was great. It was great. I love it. I love it, and I'm glad you're the first person back. You know, you're the first person after this big time off that I've had from doing this. It's been great. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
We'll do it again soon. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
You too, man.